Hey, everybody. I hope everybody's doing well, especially after that Mars-Uranus conjunction that was also conjunct fixed star algol. But I wanted to come through this episode and talk about something that I think is very important. I want to talk about polarization, especially as it pertains to American politics. But from a spiritual perspective, what is polarization? What does it mean to be polarized? How can you depolarize yourself? Which I think is one of the best things that you can do, especially given the climate in American politics right now. So let's stay tuned for that. Also, to everybody, full moon blessings. I'm recording this on the date of the full moon in Capricorn. And man, there's so much to talk about. I'll talk a little bit about that, but for sure, we're going to talk about polarization. So stay tuned. Okay, I'm sure everybody has been paying somewhat of attention, even if you don't watch the news, even if you're not checking your social media feeds every 5 minutes. I am pretty sure that you have seen the things happening with politics, especially in the US. Now, as I record this, it was just released. President Biden released a letter. It says, fellow Americans, over the past 3.5 years, we have made great progress as a nation. Today, America has the strongest economy in the world. We've made historic investments in rebuilding our nation, in lowering prescription drug costs for seniors, and in expanding affordable health care to a record number of Americans. We've provided critically needed care to 1 million veterans exposed to toxic substances, passed the first gun safety law in 30 years, appointed the first African-American woman to the Supreme Court, and passed the most significant climate legislation in the history of the world. America has never been better positioned to lead than we are today. I know none of this could have been done without you, the American people. Together, we overcame a once-in-a-century pandemic and the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. We've protected and preserved our democracy, and we've revitalized and strengthened our alliances around the world. It has been the greatest honor of my life to serve as your president, and while it has been my intention to seek re-election, I believe it is in the best interest of my party and the country for me to stand down and to focus solely on fulfilling my duties as president for the remainder of my term. I will speak to the nation later this week in more detail about my decision. For now, let me express my deepest gratitude to all those who have worked so hard to see me reelected. I want to thank Vice President Kamala Harris for being an extraordinary partner in all this work. And let me express my heartfelt appreciation to the American people for the faith and trust you have placed in me. I believe today, what I always have, that there is nothing America can't do when we do it together. We just have to remember we are the United States of America. Signed, Joe Biden. Now, my talk may ruffle some feathers with people. So I warn you in advance, I am depolarized. We're going to talk about what polarization is, how I went through the process years ago of starting my depolarization, how you can recognize if you're polarized, and how you can make the most out of recognizing polarization in other people. I'm saying this for a reason. Now, let me preface this with saying, before anyone gets upset, I know politics is a very sensitive subject to speak about, as is religion. This is what most people say, that in work environments or in circumstances where you have to be a little bit more formal, or even at family events, for Christ's sakes, don't talk about religion or politics. It is a true way to divide. It is a true way to make people feel a kind of way. And I get it. I do. It makes sense. Because I've watched it happen, especially since the nodes were in Gemini and Sagittarius, when you were just seeing who was willing to listen to new information, North Node and Gemini, and who was standing on their soapbox of their beliefs, no matter what you said to them, no matter what they were presented with. It becomes difficult to resist sometimes, and believe me, y'all are listening to a person talk who has a grand trine between their moon, Mars conjunct Jupiter and Venus. Like, it is, when I get riled up, I get very riled up. And I have a 0 degree, Mars. Per degree theory, that's an Aries degree. I see how I can get big mad. So I've had to do some work on myself to be able to pull it back. Like, I even have an album on my Facebook page about, like, me fighting back and forth with people in the spiritual community online. Just some of the most notable arguments. And while I am not the sort of person that goes looking for an argument, if you bring one my way in my space, in the past specifically, it was going to be a problem. And because I'm depolarized, I felt even more solid standing my ground with anybody who started anything with me, because most of the people I see that clap at you first tend to be polarized. Now, we're going to talk about where we get, where I'm coming to this conclusion, I guess you could say, about polarization and what it's taught me. The very first thing that I would pretty much suggest you should do is look into a book called Kybalion. Kybalion. Now, for edification, you can get this in physical book form. I know it's available on Kindle. And also, I'm sure if you search the internet, you can find a PDF version of the Kybalion. I have a PDF version myself that I found years ago. Now, I remember before when someone asked me how I knew I had to take my spirituality and astrological journey seriously, what was a catalyst for that? And honestly, it was after doing some book reading myself. I would watch Santos Bonacci's videos and listen to some of the things he was talking about in his syncretism, which incorporates just about everything, to be honest. And he mentioned something about a hermetic law, and I was like, oh, I meant to look into that. Well, the Kybalion is actually a place where you would find, or a writing where you would find some knowledge and information about hermetic law. And I want to make content in the future to kind of like go through the Kybalion and break down the hermetic principles and such, because I really think that it's helpful. A lot of the things contained therein have helped me to really understand the nature of the universe and of my spiritual journey itself. However, I want to make sure, so I'm pulling it up here, my PDF version. I want to make sure that I'm covering some important things. Now, this is written from the standpoint that this knowledge is not necessarily supposed to be shared with the so-called masses. I don't know how to put this, because like, I don't want to sound mean or gatekeepy, but have you ever explained something to someone, and in the midst of explaining it, based on how they were looking at you or the responses they were giving, you could tell they just simply were not going to get it? And it wasn't even necessarily because of how you were speaking it. This is just a subject matter that would go over their head. Well, in the Kybalion, there's a part of it in the introduction that says, "Oh, let not the flame die out, cherished age after age in its dark cavern, in its holy temples, cherished, fed by pure ministers of love, let not the flame die out." So what this is talking about is people who have chosen to follow the wisdom of the Kybalion. And this part's interesting. These men have never sought popular approval, nor numbers of followers. They are indifferent to these things, for they know how few they are in each generation who are ready for the truth, or who would, I can't read today, or any day, Mercury and Pisces, thank you for jumbling my words, or who would recognize it if it were presented to them. They reserve, and here's the part that I was reading this for, straw meat for men, while others furnish the milk for babes. They reserve their pearls of wisdom for the few elect who recognize their value and who wear them in their crowns, instead of casting them before the materialistic, vulgar swine who would trample them in the mud and mix them with their disgusting mental food. But still, these men have never forgotten or overlooked the original teachings of Hermes regarding the passing on the words of truth to those ready to receive it, which teaching is stated in the Kybalion as follows: "Where fall the footsteps of the master, the ears of those ready for this teaching open wide." And again, when the ears of the student are ready to hear, then cometh the lips to fill them with wisdom. But their customary attitude has always been strictly in accordance with the other hermetic aphorism, also in the Kybalion: "The lips of wisdom are closed except to the ears of understanding." I love that. Please remember, the lips of wisdom are closed except to the ears of understanding, because this very much falls into what I want to talk about, being polarized. Now, if you think about communicating with people about just about anything, you could become polarized over anything. I'm specifically going to focus on, politics, but what we're talking about is, even if you've had the experience, the study, or the knowledge, and you've put that knowledge to work, which then turns the knowledge into wisdom. If a person does not want to understand or can't understand, then all that wisdom and knowledge does not matter to them. Like, it's going to miss them. You're not even going to be able to waste your time on them. And I have had to realize this over years of basically arguing with strangers online. Like, I have no idea, except for the previous comments I could see from someone in a thread, where they stand on something. And where they stand on something and what they wrote doesn't even necessarily totally encompass them completely as a person. We have split seconds to try to understand people with what they provide. And even what they provide, even if we do understand it, does not necessarily mean that's the totality of that person. Keeping that in mind, here's where it gets interesting. The principle of the Kybalion that or hermetic philosophy that we're going to talk about today, is the fourth principle. It is the principle of polarity. Now, before that, you have the principle of mentalism, the principle of correspondence, the principle of vibration, then the principle of polarity, and then after that, the principle of rhythm, the principle of cause and effect, and the principle of gender. So I'm going to scroll down to the very beginning where it starts talking about the principle of polarity. And thus it begins saying something that I think you should keep in mind. Everything is dual. Everything has poles. Everything has its pair of opposites. Like and unlike are the same. Opposites are identical in nature, but different in degree. Extremes meet. All truths, but half-truths. All paradoxes may be reconciled. If you heard that and it struck you as a little weird and strange at first, understandable. But when I heard that, it sent me down a thought rabbit hole that I was like, oh shit, that kind of makes sense. So I'm going to continue to read just a small introduction where it talks about polarity. The principle embodies the truth that everything is dual, everything has two poles, everything has its pair of opposites, all of which were old hermetic axioms. It explains the old paradoxes that have perplexed so many, which have been stated as follows. Thesis and antithesis are identical in nature, but different in degree. Opposites are the same, differing only in degree. The pairs of opposites may be reconciled. Extremes meet. Everything is and isn't at the same time. All truths but half-truths. Every truth is half false. There are two sides to everything, etc., etc., etc. It explains that in everything there are two poles or opposite aspects, and that opposites are really only the two extremes of the same thing with varying degrees between them. To illustrate, heat and cold, although opposites are really the same thing, the differences consisting merely of degrees of the same thing. Look at your thermometer and see if you can discover where heat terminates and cold begins. There's no such thing as absolute heat or absolute cold. The two terms heat and cold simply indicate varying degrees of the same thing. And that same thing, which manifests as heat and cold, is merely a form, variety, and rate of vibration. So, heat and cold are simply the two poles of that which we call heat. And the phenomena attendant thereupon are manifestations of the principle of polarity. The same principle manifests in the case of light and darkness, which are the same thing, the difference consisting of varying degrees between the two poles of the phenomenon. Where does darkness leave off and light begin? What is the difference between large and small, between hard and soft, between black and white, between sharp and dull, between noise and quiet, between high and low, between positive and negative? The principle of polarity explains these paradoxes, and no other principle can supersede it. The same principle operates on the mental plane. Let's take a radical and extreme example, that of love and hate, even though, for me, I would say hate is not the opposite of love, it's apathy. But whatever. Love and hate. Two mental states apparently totally different. And yet, there are degrees of hate and degrees of love, and a middle point in which we use the terms like or dislike, which shade into each other so gradually that sometimes we are at a loss to know whether we like or dislike or neither. And all are simply degrees of the same thing, as you will see if you will but think for a moment. And more than this, and considered of more importance by the Hermetist, it is possible to change the vibrations of hate to the vibrations of love in one's own mind and in the minds of others. Many of you who read these lines have had personal experiences of the involuntary rapid transition from love to hate, and the reverse, in your case and that of others. And you will therefore realize the possibility of this being accomplished by the use of the will, by means of hermetic formulas. Good and evil are but the poles of the same thing, and the Hermetist understands the art of transmuting evil into good by means of an application of the principle of polarity. In short, the art of polarization becomes a phase of mental alchemy known and practiced by the ancient and modern Hermetic masters. An understanding of the principle will enable one to change his own polarity as well as that of others, if he will devote the time and study necessary to master the art. So, given what we just read there from the Kybalion, if we're thinking about American politics, we know that there would be Democrat versus Republican. Now, I know a lot of people feel compelled because there are basically those two choices. I mean, there's other parties and such, but because Democrats and Republicans are the majority parties in our country, it becomes a little hard to just like be like, oh, you have a few other choices. Yeah. Okay. A lot of good, sometimes it feels like those choices do. But I wanted to say this. I used to lean heavily left and Democratic, especially from about like 7th grade until graduating high school. I participated in mock debates at school. I remember one where, and shout out to Erin Dunn, I think we were in 12th grade, when she was Bob Dole in the debate and I was Bill Clinton, right? In Mr. Wiener's class at Archbishop Prendergast. A lot of what I thought was correct, not just for me and the side that I wanted to side with, but correct for all people, because that's another thing that I notice politically people do. It's not even just about, oh, I'm being selfish and pick what best works out for me. A lot of times people are like, no, these are the values I'm standing behind and on, as I think they should apply to the entire country. And I had a moment where I was like, I can make a difference in this world. I can't wait until I'm 18 and I can vote. And I couldn't vote until the election of 2000 because I wasn't 18 until that election. And a lot of stuff happened, if y'all remember, with the election of 2000. I was proud of myself. I was a new mom. I remember I took my newborn daughter with me to the polling booth. I cast my vote. At that time, I voted for Al Gore. I stayed up most of the night trying to look at all the votes come in. I got sleepy and realized with a newborn, you better go to sleep when you can. So I fall asleep. The baby wakes up. I feed her. We both go back to sleep. And when I wake up in the morning, I went to bed with the projected winner being Al Gore. Woke up to them saying, hold up. George Bush is the winner. And I'm like, what? Excuse me. What is going on? I had never really questioned the validity of voting, our government, a bunch of other stuff before this time. So this began my journey of being like, how can this even happen? And if you guys remember, they pulled all sorts of ballots to look at the Chads. There were dimpled Chads, pregnant Chads. Did this person vote for this person? It was a mess. It made my head hurt. But I'm glad that happened because it was the beginning of my journey to being depolarized. Because when I was still polarized, if you even remotely said something that sounded like it was a right-wing talking point, I would have lost my shit. I wouldn't be able to listen to you because I would have just immediately assumed that you were against me. That's the problem with polarization. When you're polarized, you're easily triggered. Because there's a little bit of truth everywhere, because opposites can be reconciled, because you can really almost always, I would say always, find common ground. It's just about the individuals participating to find it. But if you're polarized, it's going to be difficult to listen to people because and honestly, let's put it to you this way. I don't necessarily like giving up and away my power and control to other people. And if you think about it, if you allow others to trigger you, especially before they've even gotten a full sentence out of their mouth, you've given them so much power over you. Assumptions sometimes are safe to make. Assumptions in the climate that we live in right now, not so safe to make. It only adds and lends more fire to the polarization. Everybody's angry. Everybody's mad. Ever since the assassination attempt on former President Trump happened, I've seen so much stuff. I can't even begin to tell you guys the shift that it felt like on my timeline about all of the different suppositions about what really happened. I'm not saying it's not healthy to question things. I think you should. I think that actually is very normal and healthy. However, if you're going to do that, do you question the side that you belong to? Or do you only question the side that opposes you? Because one thing I can't stand is watching people who can only seem to save all their criticism for the opposite side. I criticize everything. I criticize myself. I criticize stuff I'm a part of. I criticize stuff I'm not a part of. Every side can get it. It is confusing to me to watch people only have smoke for the side that opposes theirs. When we think of being polarized politically, I want you to remember that when you're in it, when you are polarized, it's hard to even realize that you are. But when you start to shift out of it, it becomes almost like crystal clear to you that, oh shit, I'm really polarized. I don't understand fully how to have and command more control over my mind. I mean, I know that sounds extreme, but I think that's the way that you should look at it. Nobody, in a lot of the things that we argue about politically, nobody knows the absolute answers to everything. Yet everybody stands on their side as if they know the absolute answers to everything. And I don't think it's smart ever to do that. We can all be wrong. We're all human beings. We're fallible. We're here to learn lessons. We're imperfect. So why do we fight each other? Like we're standing on the perfect side. And then even bigger than that, and having a daughter who talks to me about politics and is now an adult has been interesting because I've explained my journey to her. And she had put up a post asking people, like, why is it that older generations of people simply tell young people to get out here and vote? And then they'll guilt you and say, your ancestors died for this right, you better get out here and vote. And she's like, nobody actually discusses politics with us to let us know what it would behoove us to be looking for, what we should be voting about, what we should care about. Nobody ever talks about that. They just said, go and vote. It's like just something to say. And I was like, wow, that's an interesting point. I feel you on that. What are you supposed to be able to do with your vote? It's so important, right? If nobody ever teaches you, I mean, yeah, we learn it in school and such, but she was talking about from the adults in most people's lives, from their family, from people that they've come to trust. Why is there not more emphasis placed on why it's so important to vote? How come nobody was telling people that every 4 years, when they're flipping out about who's going to be president, yet they haven't participated in any local elections, which basically influence you more on a day-to-day basis? Just saying. We don't do those things, yet everybody's fighting. So right now, from what I can see, since the president has now said he is dropping out of the election, social media is going to be on fire the next couple days. We just went through, Mars conjunct Uranus conjunct fixed star Algol, where literally, Algol, head of Medusa, the Gorgon, former President Trump shot in the head, or got clipped in the ear with an attempt to shoot him in the head. Are you kidding me? Do you guys not remember mythology? Please look up Medusa and Perseus. Please do. And look up fixed star Algol. You can't make this stuff up. We're seeing in real time the stuff that astrologers have been talking about for freaking ever. I saw somebody say astrology is for people that pay attention. Yes, the fuck it is. Anyway, I digress. This part is also going to kind of feed into something else that's important, unrelated, but slightly related, about how people communicate, how they listen to one another, how most people are listening to respond, not to understand. And I thought about this the other day when I was thinking about the fact that I hate being misunderstood. I provide so much context, so many details. I want person to be able to fully grasp where I'm coming from. And there are people in the world that don't communicate like that, or they don't even realize that they're not giving enough details. They're being vague. And the last thing you want to do to a Virgo dominant person is be vague. Because I'm going to hit you with a bunch of questions to get clarification. Now, while I have found in my lifetime that some people don't mind that you are asking questions for clarification because they're like, oh no, they get that you're trying to understand and that you don't want to misunderstand them. Whereas some people, as soon as you start asking them questions, they get irritated. Why? Well, I found over time that usually the people that get the most irritated when you ask questions for clarity are those who were manipulating in the first place and don't want to be clear. They're mad that the BS didn't fly. But that's a whole other story. But ask yourself, how do you listen? Do you listen to respond? Do you listen to understand? Do you regularly, if a person says something and you don't quite understand what they're saying, do you ask them for clarification? And then not only that, what command do you have over your emotional reactions? How composed can you stay through something that your brain is filtering as being against the very things that you believe? Do you realize that a lot of times, due to our triggers, as soon as other people begin talking, if we don't allow them the opportunity to completely speak, we don't necessarily know where they're going with what they're saying. We may think we do. And sometimes we get upset unnecessarily because we didn't allow them to finish and just assumed who they were, what they thought, and where they were going with their thought. That is a major problem on social media, especially because, granted, in a comment section, a person isn't going to write an entire epistle about their background, how they grew up, blah, 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 while responding to one point. It's going to be a lot of things that need to be considered when interacting with people. However, it just turns into people calling people libtards versus boomers. Y'all want us to be in The Handmaid's Tale versus you guys are crazy and triggered and snowflakes. It's so much. And divorcing yourself from that madness really is a weird sort of waking up. Like, when you realize, when you sit back and look at how people interact with each other about a subject like politics, if you can use your best objective, which I would relate to Aquarius, and if you think about it, if Libra is placed on the ascendant, which judges things out, weighs things out, fairness, justice, whatever, Libra is going to have Aquarius in the 5th house at the heart of it. Aquarius's objectivity serves it to actually know what's going on. That's a key word for Aquarius, is knowing. I know. So if at the heart of Libra is a knowing, that's knowing when to step back, suspend how you feel about something, and truly give yourself the opportunity to hear all sides. You can't gain any knowledge by talking over people and not listening to people. If you know everything already, you're basically saying there's nothing else for you to learn. How can anybody bring anything towards you? Now, we're in really, really hard times economically. Prices are continuing to rise. I can't even believe the leap, even just from last year this time, to how expensive specifically food is. Like, it blows my mind. And I'm a Venus and Taurus person. I love my food. So I'm definitely noticing even the smallest jump in prices. And then sometimes it's interesting to think of how we respond to rising rates when they personally affect us, yet there's a lot of times none of us think of when everything is going swimmingly. How many people have food instability and don't even have access to the things that we do? It's interesting. But that's another story. Let me not trail off to something else. Now, astrologically, when we talk about polarity, that should be easy for you to understand. Every sign has an opposite or sister sign. Aries has Libra. Taurus has Scorpio. Gemini has Sagittarius. Cancer has Capricorn. Leo has Aquarius. And then Virgo has Pisces. So the reason that I think it's important to kind of look at this astrologically as well is because one of the things that I tell people when they're learning their chart placements or just learning to identify astrological energy is, since this is a reminder to people, astrological language would literally be taking everything in the universe, and I'm going to say known and unknown, and I've said this before, because we constantly have new discoveries and new inventions, etc., and placing them in one of 12 categories. If that's everything in the universe, known and unknown, there's going to be a lot of shit in each category, which is one of the reasons why the first thing you should really do when learning astrology is making sure that you totally understand the essences and qualities of each zodiac sign and what would correspond to them. That is the basis for the language. That is one of the first things one should do, or you're going to be confused. You should not be just looking at, if I say Aries, you think of an Aries sun person. What are all the things that are encompassed under the rulership of Aries and the rest of the signs? But I digress. I brought this up to say, sometimes when people are dealing with certain energies in a chart that they're struggling with, like if you have, let's say, a Pisces stellium, lot of Pisces energy. We can name a bunch of positive things about Pisces. But what about the negative things? Let's say you're struggling with sleep, which is a Pisces thing, procrastination, not being able to move forward in a direction because you can see how everything is connected and that's overwhelming. It's very Piscean. Whereas its opposite or sister sign, Virgo, is the details. Big picture versus what's in front of us. How do we step by step break this down? But we also know, you've heard people say before, that the devil's in the details. And if the devil's in the details, that means if you're too Virgoing, you gotta kind of move across that spectrum towards Pisces and vice versa. It's about seeking balance. It's about coming to harmony. Yeah, sometimes it's gonna help you to be hard on them facts. Other times, if you can't connect with the general big vision of something, how the fuck can you even build it? You know what I mean? Politically, and I don't care what side you align with on this, and one of the things that I'm not going to do, especially in an election year, is get into arguments with people about politics. I just refuse. Now, will I say that I understand why other people engage in it? I do. But even with that understanding and having been where they are and emerged in the fashion that I have now, just not gonna do it. No arguments about politics. Now, realizing your entire life set of circumstances, what you were taught, where you grew up, the experiences that you've had, all are going to be things that are going to influence and impact you to be emboldened to a particular side on the political spectrum, right? Sometimes people change their minds. Sometimes people flip-flop back and forth. And then you have people like me who are kind of like, you know, it's really hard to stick with either of you because what? I politically sometimes have what I guess would be unpopular opinions. I've told people before when I first decided to come out of the astrological closet, one of the things that was compelling me to do so was because I had lived through a very dark period that started with my Saturn return that had me completely enmeshed in my own victimhood. My victim mentality was out of fucking control. And at the time, while steeped in it, I didn't realize I was even doing that. I was so stuck in it, I didn't realize how much I was victimizing myself. And astrology helped to save my life because it pulled me out of that depression and allowed me to take accountability for myself and not be a victim. I say this to say, and this is not, let me preface this. This is not me saying I think if We did things in a completely opposite way than we are doing them in this example I'm about to give, that everything would just be perfect. But I'm originally from the city of Philadelphia. When I looked up politics in Philadelphia, since the year that my maternal grandmother was born, we have had a Democratic mayor. So in other words, we've been under rulership of Democrats since the year my grandmother was born. With that in mind, and I love my city, I'm from there, it's always going to be home, I'm always excited when I go back, but I am in the mountains for a reason. Because I couldn't take it anymore. The crime and the gun violence in Philadelphia, even though I just read something that said as of the end of April 2024, there were 86 shootings, which was down the lowest in Philadelphia since 2016. So they are decreasing a bit. However, it's wild. Before I moved to the mountains, I lived in the Kensington section, which is being gentrified. Fixed up, new buildings, all this good shit, right? Of Philadelphia. Anybody listening that isn't familiar with Kensington, the Kensington section of Philadelphia, just look it up on YouTube. You'll see countless videos come up to show you what it looks like over there. I was there throughout 2020 and reminding people, I knew we were going to have riots and shit that year, because when I first started looking at Saturn going into Aquarius, I looked back on the last time Saturn was in Aquarius. And that's when we had the Rodney King beating, subsequent trial and acquittal, and then the LA riots. But anyway, I digress. This is going to sound really harsh, but Kensington is the largest open-air drug market on the East Coast. Some people call it the Walking Dead up there. It's zombie land, whatever. And though I can have a lot of compassion for people who have drug problems, I would be lying if I didn't say that some stuff just skeeves me out. And coming out of your door to leave your home and to have someone half standing, half bent over, nodded out on, I'm gonna assume heroin. I don't know. I'm not a druggie, even though I'm a Pisces, and Pisces is associated with drugs and intoxicants. It skeeved me out. I wasn't able to get comfortable the entire time I was there. Like I just did not feel comfortable. The energy and the vibe of the place was too much for me. No bueno. So I was grateful to come up to the mountains. But what I'm saying is, the things that I've experienced in Philadelphia is on the negative side of, maybe you could tie it back to our politics. If we keep voting the same way, and from what I can tell, politics in Philly is, we need change, we need this, we need to be able to support certain underserved communities. Like, all sound like good intentions, but to me, continually paint the problems that we have as continual. And for what? So that we'll keep voting these people in. I know a lot of people don't necessarily like hearing things like this, but to me, we keep voting the same way, not getting anything different, and then complaining, and then rinse and repeat. Not saying that if all of a sudden we elected a Republican mayor in Philadelphia, things would be automatically different. But do you see my point? I'm saying even my city is polarized. And how has it helped my city? It hasn't. When you think about where you stand on certain issues and why you're aligned to the side that you're aligned to, do you ever ask yourself if there's any validity to somebody on the other side's opinion on, like, let's say a same issue, homelessness? I know they just cleaned up, or supposedly cleared out, Kensington. There's a huge homeless population up there. People come from all over the country and get hooked on the drugs there. It's really, really sad. Funny story, not so funny. It wasn't funny to me at the time. I work from home. I came out of my house one day so I could go to the corner store, grab the stuff that I needed for the morning, and get to work. Up in Kensington, there are a lot of people who do outreach, different religious organizations. I don't know which one this is that I encountered this day, but they have on two young white men, white shirts, ties, black pants, walking up the street with a wagon with lunches to give out to people. Now, I came out the house not necessarily looking my best, trying to hurry up, get my stuff at the store, go back home, go to work. And these young men approach me and they're like, "Ma'am, you look so hungry. Would you like something to eat?" And I'm just like, please give that to someone who needs it. I'm just trying to get back in my house. Oh, and they're so apologetic. "Oh, I'm sorry." And I'm like, damn, I look bad today. But I started thinking about something. I could really respect what those young men were out there doing. But then I've heard people talk about, why are you feeding these people? That's just encouraging them to stay in this neighborhood and make it a blight. Like, if people do things for them, they're never going to get up off their asses, even though obviously a lot of people up there have, it's not necessarily laziness, I would say, is the problem. Addiction is a really heavy issue. But the good that I could see with those young men helping out, even though I probably wouldn't subscribe to their religious tenets, I wouldn't necessarily want to join them in their religion just because I saw they were doing a good thing by feeding people. People need food to survive, right? However, I could also understand someone's contention that they're worried that sort of help would make people dependent on it and not want to do what they have to do to get themselves together. I could see that point, but my point is this. If you listen to what I was just talking about and automatically got so triggered when you heard me talking about somebody else's opinion that would be different than yours, ask yourself what triggered you so badly. There's not a person on earth that you're going to meet ever that's going to 100% agree with you on everything. It's just not going to happen. As much as there are people that I find to be like my tribe, we seem to be on the same page about most things. I know in my heart of hearts, there's got to be stuff we disagree on, and that's okay. Now, in a political climate, I know some people's arguments will be that this is so serious. This is very serious. Why? You're asking me why I'm so passionate, because this is about our lives. Okay, I got you. But I'm going to tell you guys something that I've been subscribing to since beginning my polarization or depolarization. Do you know what I am most concerned with at the end of the day? No matter what the political or economic climate, I am committed to learning and being comfortable navigating the waters that those things will bring. Some things are going to be out of the scope of my control. Some things I'm not going to have any input on, yet they're going to affect me. So am I flexible? Am I fluid? Am I mutable? And in terms of astrological signs, mutable energy would be Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, and Pisces. But am I willing to make the necessary changes as times dictate that I should to remain healthy, or as healthy as possible given circumstances? Be that like financially healthy, emotionally healthy, physically healthy. Navigating the climate is going to be super important. If I put all of my attention on fighting people who appear to be on the opposite end of the spectrum from me and not enough into understanding, because understanding gives you a springboard for action. It really does. If you can slow yourself down enough to recognize your own triggers, what is it that makes you angry when someone says anything? I watch it happen all the time on social media. It's a playground rife for misunderstanding. Are we listening to understand? Or are we listening to respond? Are we aware of our own emotional triggers when people speak to us? Are we willing to make the necessary changes, even if that means learning to stop yourself, take a deep breath, even ask a person to repeat themselves because you felt yourself going to a place that you didn't want to in terms of understanding? You got to learn how to do that. It's so important.